My daughter-in-law invited her lover into my house while I mourned my husband. I pretended not to notice. 3 nights later, she told me I should start looking at retirement homes because this house was too big for one old woman. I simply nodded. What she didn't know was that Richard had prepared for this long before he died. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The first time I noticed the strange pair of men's shoes by the back door, I told myself they probably belonged to Daniel. Grief makes your mind foggy. At least, that's what everyone says. After my husband died, people spoke to me like I was fragile glass. They lowered their voices. They touched my arm too gently. Even the cashier at the grocery store looked at me with pity when I forgot my debit card PIN one afternoon. But grief didn't make me blind. It sharpened certain things. The house felt painfully quiet after Richard's funeral. Too quiet for a place that had once held 40 years of family dinners, football games on Sundays, grandchildren running through the hallway, and Richard humming old Frank Sinatra's songs while fixing things in the garage. Now all I heard was the grandfather clock in the foyer. Tick, tick, tick. Every sound echoed through the hardwood floors, like the house itself was mourning with me. Richard had been gone only 9 days. 9 days since the hospital room. 9 days since I held his hand, while the heart monitor flattened into one endless tone I still heard in my sleep. At 69 years old, I thought I understood loss. My parents were gone. My older sister, too. Friends had passed over the years. But losing a husband, after 42 years of marriage, felt different. It felt like someone had removed the walls from around my life and left me, standing in cold wind. That Thursday evening, rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while I reheated leftover chicken soup. I wasn't hungry, but Margaret always said, warm food keeps grief from swallowing you whole. Margaret Ellis had been my best friend since 1978. She called every morning now. Eat something, Evelyn, she kept telling me. So I tried. The microwave hummed softly while I stood at the counter wearing one of Richard's old navy sweaters. It still smelled faintly like his cedarwood aftershave. I hadn't washed it yet. I couldn't. Upstairs, I heard footsteps. Then laughter. A man's laughter. Low. Unfamiliar. I froze. For a moment, I honestly believed exhausted mind had imagined it. Daniel was supposed to be in Philadelphia for work until Friday afternoon. Vanessa had mentioned it twice during breakfast, almost casually. Daniel's conference runs through tomorrow, she'd said while scrolling through her phone. It's just going to be us tonight. Us. The word suddenly felt strange in my chest. Another laugh drifted downstairs. Then Vanessa's voice. Soft, playful, not the voice she used around me. I slowly turned off the microwave before it beeped. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I didn't want them hearing me. Maybe some part of me already knew I wasn't supposed to hear whatever was happening upstairs. The staircase creaked beneath my feet as I climbed slowly, one hand gripping the railing. Richard had polished every spring himself. Halfway up, I stopped. A man's leather jacket hung over the guest room chair. Not Daniel's. Daniel hated leather jackets. My stomach tightened. The guest room door was partially open. Warm light spilling into the hallway. And then I heard Vanessa laugh again. "You're terrible," she whispered. The man answered something too low for me to catch. I moved closer. Slowly, quietly. At my age, people assume you move carefully because you're weak. The truth is, older women learn silence because silence reveals things. From the doorway, I saw them. Vanessa stood near the bed wearing silk pajamas I'd never seen before. Her hand rested against a tall man's chest while he sipped whiskey from one of Richard's crystal glasses. My husband's glass. The same set we bought in Vermont during our 25th anniversary trip. For a second, the world became perfectly still. Not dramatic, not explosive, just cold. The man looked younger than Vanessa by a few years. Dark hair, expensive watch, confident posture. He belonged in a luxury condo downtown, not inside my home, while my husband's funeral flowers were still alive downstairs. Vanessa noticed me first. Her smile disappeared instantly, but only for a second. Then something remarkable happened. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked annoyed, like I had interrupted her evening. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, stepping away from the man, "you scared me?" I stared at her, at the whiskey glass, at Richard's framed photograph sitting on the hallway table behind her. The funeral home sympathy cards still covered the downstairs piano. And this woman had brought another man into my house before the casseroles had even stopped arriving. "I thought you were asleep," she continued. The man shifted awkwardly, but said nothing. I noticed his overnight bag beside the bed. Overnight. My chest tightened so sharply I had to grip the doorframe. Not because of jealousy. Not because Vanessa owed me loyalty. But because grief had barely settled into the walls of this house. And already she was treating it like a hotel lobby. "I'm sorry," the man muttered finally. "I should probably go." Vanessa touched his arm immediately. "No, it's fine." Then she looked directly at me. "You're not the only lonely person in this house, Evelyn." The words landed harder than a slap. For a moment, I simply looked at her, at the smooth blonde hair, the perfect manicure, the calm expression. This was the woman I had welcomed into our family 13 years ago. The woman whose bridal shower I hosted in this very dining room. The woman I defended every time neighbors called her cold or calculating. And suddenly, standing there beneath the warm hallway lights, I realized something terrifying. Richard had seen her clearly, long before I ever did. I nodded once. Then I quietly turned around and walked back downstairs. No screaming, no crying, no confrontation. Just the sound of my slippers against the hardwood floor and the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the dark foyer. Tick, tick, tick. They thought grief had made me weak. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while rain slid softly down the bedroom windows. Richard had installed himself nearly 20 years ago. The old ceiling fan turned in slow circles above me, pushing cool air through a room that suddenly no longer felt safe. Down the hall, I occasionally heard muffled footsteps. A door opening. Quiet laughter. Then silence again. Each sound settled heavily inside my chest. I kept my eyes fixed on the shadows moving across the ceiling, and tried not to think about the fact that another man was sleeping under the same roof, where my husband had taken his final breath only 9 days earlier. At some point around 3 in the morning, I finally got out of bed. The hardwood floor felt cold beneath my feet. As I walked downstairs, wrapped in Richard's navy cardigan, the kitchen smelled faintly like coffee grounds and lemon furniture polish. Familiar smells. Safe smells. I clung to them. The digital clock on the microwave glowed 3:17 a.m. I filled the kettle with water and stood silently at the sink while it heated. Outside, the neighborhood sat dark and still beneath the rain. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement like pale gold ribbons. This house had once felt warm at every hour of the day. Now, it felt divided. Upstairs belonged to strangers. I wrapped both hands around my teacup and sat at the kitchen table where Richard and I used to read the newspaper together every morning. Pushed back from the table exactly where it had been before the ambulance came. I still couldn't bring myself to move it. That was the cruel thing about grief. The world expected you to continue functioning while part of your life remained frozen in place. At 7:30, I heard Vanessa moving around upstairs. Cabinet doors opened. The shower ran. Then the smell of expensive perfume drifted down the hallway. By the time she entered the kitchen, she looked polished and rested in cream-colored slacks and a fitted sweater. as if she were preparing for brunch with friends instead of walking through a grieving household. "Morning," she said casually. I looked up from my tea. "Morning." If she felt uncomfortable about the night before, she hid it well. Vanessa moved around the kitchen confidently, opening drawers without hesitation, taking out the good coffee beans Richard normally saved for holidays. The small familiarity of it bothered me more than I expected. She behaved like ownership had already transferred, like the house belonged to her now. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked while scrolling through her phone. "A little. That's good." Silence settled between us. I studied her quietly over the rim of my mug. Not long ago, I used to admire how composed Vanessa always seemed. She never raised her voice, never appeared emotional. She handled every social gathering perfectly, always saying the right thing in front of guests. But over the years, I had started noticing the colder things underneath. The way she corrected Daniel in front of people. The way she rearranged furniture in my home without asking. The way she slowly removed old family photos and replaced them with newer ones that featured mostly her side of the family. Tiny things, easy things to dismiss, until suddenly they weren't. "Daniel called," she said after a moment. "His meetings are running late. He'll probably stay another night in Philadelphia." I nodded slowly. Another night. So the man upstairs hadn't been a one-time mistake. Vanessa poured herself coffee before finally glancing toward me. "You know," she said carefully, "I've been thinking." There it was. That tone. Soft, controlled, artificially gentle. "We should probably start discussing long-term plans." I set my cup down quietly. "What kind of plans?" "For the house." My fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "This house is very large, Evelyn. A lot for one person to manage at your age." At your age. The phrase slid across the table like ice water. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms lightly. "There are some beautiful retirement communities outside Hartford. Places with activities and medical support. Less stress for everyone. Everyone. Not you. Not what's best for you. Just easier for everyone else." I looked toward the window above the sink where rain still streaked the glass. Richard used to stand there every winter morning, warming his hands around coffee, before heading out to shovel snow. Suddenly, I heard his voice in my memory as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "This house will always be your safe place, Evie." My throat tightened. Vanessa mistook my silence for weakness. She stepped closer and lowered her voice sympathetically. "You shouldn't have to carry all this alone anymore." I finally looked at her directly. And who would carry it instead? For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation, quickly hidden. "Well," she said lightly, "Daniel and I have talked about possibly renovating eventually. Starting fresh." Starting fresh. Inside my chest, something cold settled firmly into place. This wasn't grief anymore. It was realization. The overnight guest, the subtle conversations, the pressure beginning less than 2 weeks after Richard's death. None of this had started recently. It had only become visible recently. Vanessa checked her phone again before grabbing her purse from the counter. "I'm heading out for a while," she said. "There's quiche in the fridge if you get hungry." Then she paused near the doorway. "Oh, and Travis may stop by later to pick up his jacket." Travis. She said his name casually now, as if introducing him slowly into the house made it acceptable. As if I were expected to adapt. The front door closed behind her a moment later. Silence returned immediately. I remained at the kitchen table for a very long time, listening to the grandfather clock echo through the empty hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Then I slowly stood up, walked to Richard's old desk in the study, and opened the bottom drawer he always kept locked. For the first time since the funeral, I reached for the folder labeled Estate Documents. My hands trembled slightly as I opened Richard's desk drawer. Not from fear, from memory. That desk had been part of our marriage for almost 30 years. Richard bought it from an antique store outside Burlington during one of our anniversary trips. He spent weeks restoring the wood in our garage, carefully sanding every corner while old jazz records played through a dusty radio beside him. Good furniture deserves patience, he used to say. So did good people. Inside the drawer sat neatly organized folders, exactly the way Richard always kept them. Insurance documents, property taxes, investment accounts. His handwriting labeled every tab in blue ink so precise it almost looked printed. For a moment, seeing those labels made my chest ache harder than anything Vanessa had said. Grief hides in ordinary things. In handwriting, in jackets hanging by the door, in coffee mugs nobody else uses. I carefully lifted the folder marked estate documents and carried it to the dining room table. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, falling across the polished mahogany surface where our family once gathered every Thanksgiving. Now the house felt hollow, like a stage after the audience leaves. I opened the folder slowly. Richard had always handled most of the legal paperwork himself, though he explained enough over the years that I understood the basics. We weren't wealthy people by Connecticut standards, but after decades of careful saving, retirement investments, and the value of the house itself, there was enough to make people greedy, especially people who valued appearances. I scanned several pages before one paragraph caught my attention. In the event of my passing, the residential property located at. My eyes stopped. I read the sentence again. Then a third time. The house was not jointly transferred to Daniel. It had been placed entirely into a protected trust under my name 6 years earlier. I sat back slowly in my chair. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters. 6 years. Richard had done this 6 years ago. A strange feeling settled over me then. Not relief exactly. Something quieter, recognition. Richard had known something I didn't, or perhaps something I refused to see. I continued reading carefully. Additional clauses prevented the property from being sold, transferred, or borrowed against without my direct written authorization and legal review through Harold Bennett, our estate attorney. Harold. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. Suddenly, Vanessa's confidence from breakfast made more sense. She assumed the house automatically belonged to Daniel now. Maybe Daniel believed that too. But legally, the house was still mine. Every room, every window, Richard installed himself. Every creaking stair. I closed the folder gently and stared across the dining room toward the living room. Fireplace where Richard's funeral photo still stood surrounded by white lilies. "You knew!" I whispered softly. A lump rose painfully in my throat. Not because of the money. Because my husband had protected me even after death. The phone rang suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. "Margaret, tell me you've eaten something today," she said, immediately after I answered. Despite everything, I smiled faintly. "I had tea." "That's not food, Evelyn." "I know." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "You sound tired." I looked toward the staircase instinctively. "I had a long night." Margaret was quiet for a moment. She'd known me long enough to hear things hidden beneath words. What happened? Part of me wanted to tell her everything immediately. About the strange man upstairs. About Vanessa. About the retirement home conversation over coffee. But saying it aloud would make it real. Instead, I asked quietly, "Margaret, did Richard ever mention concerns about Vanessa to you?" Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, she sighed softly. "Oh, Evelyn." My stomach tightened. "He did, didn't he?" Margaret hesitated carefully. Richard worried Daniel trusted people too easily. People, not person. But we both knew who she meant. I closed my eyes briefly. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because you loved your family," Margaret said gently, "and Richard didn't want to hurt you, unless he absolutely had to." The truth of that landed heavily inside me. All these years, I had mistaken keeping peace for protecting family. Maybe they weren't the same thing. Margaret cleared her throat softly. Evelyn, there's something else. What is it? I saw Vanessa last Tuesday. My fingers tightened around the phone. Where? At that little restaurant near the river downtown. The Italian place Richard liked. I already knew what she was going to say before she said it. She wasn't alone. The room suddenly felt colder. I didn't say anything because I assumed Daniel was with her at first. Margaret continued carefully. But then I realized it wasn't him. I stared at the rain sliding down the dining room windows. How long were they there? Long enough to look very comfortable together. Comfortable. Such a polite word for betrayal. I swallowed slowly. Thank you for telling me. Are you all right? No. But older women learn something important eventually. You don't always survive pain by collapsing. Sometimes you survive it by becoming still. I'm fine, I said quietly. Margaret didn't sound convinced. After we hung up, I returned the estate folder to Richard's desk, but kept one document with me. The trust paperwork. I folded it carefully and slipped it inside my cardigan pocket just as the front door opened downstairs. Vanessa's voice floated into the hallway. Then a man laughed behind her. Travis. They were back earlier than expected. And this time, they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Vanessa's heels clicked lightly across the hardwood floor, while Travis carried something heavy into the kitchen. Grocery bags, maybe. Bottles clinked softly together, followed by another burst of laughter that traveled through the house far too comfortably, like they belonged here. I remained still, near Richard's study door, one hand resting against the wall to steady myself. There was a time when this house sounded different. Warm, full. On Saturday mornings, Richard used to whistle while making pancakes. Daniel would stumble downstairs half asleep in wrinkled pajamas, begging for extra bacon before soccer practice. Christmas music played from the radio, even before Thanksgiving was over, because Richard loved the holidays more than anyone I'd ever known. Back then, this felt anchored. Now it felt occupied. I slowly walked toward the staircase, careful not to let my footsteps announce me. Their voices drifted from the kitchen. You worry too much, Travis said casually. I'm serious, Vanessa replied. She notices more than people think. A short silence followed. Then Travis laughed softly again. She's grieving, Vanessa. You said she barely leaves her room. My chest tightened. There it was. Not concern. Assessment. Like I was an obstacle they were measuring. I moved quietly into the living room and sat beside the fireplace before either of them noticed me. The funeral lilies were beginning to wilt slightly around Richard's framed photograph. Some petals had already fallen onto the mantel. 9 days. Only 9 days since we buried him. The kitchen conversation stopped abruptly once Vanessa realized I was downstairs. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway carrying a paper shopping bag and wearing a bright smile so polished it almost looked rehearsed. Evelyn, she said warmly, I didn't realize you were awake. Awake. As if I were some elderly patient, everyone tiptoed around. Travis stepped into the room behind her carrying 2 wine bottles. He looked uncomfortable seeing me now in full daylight. Younger than I first thought, maybe late 30s. Expensive boots. Expensive watch. The kind of man who checked property values before learning people's last names. Mrs. Carter, he said politely. Vanessa answered before I could. This is Travis Moore. He's helping us look at renovation possibilities for the house. The house, not your house, not Evelyn's house. Already just the house. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. Renovations? Vanessa sat gracefully across from me like we were discussing garden flowers instead of dismantling my life. Well, eventually, she said lightly, Daniel and I have been talking about opening up the downstairs layout. Maybe expanding the kitchen. I looked around slowly. Richard had designed that kitchen himself, after saving for nearly 7 years. Every cabinet handle, every light fixture, every piece of oak flooring had been chosen together, one careful paycheck at a time. Suddenly, I remembered the winter we remodeled. Daniel was 12. Snowstorms kept delaying deliveries, and Richard spent entire weekends covered in sawdust, trying to finish before Christmas morning. I still remembered him, dancing with me, in the unfinished kitchen, while a portable heater rattled in the corner, and Nat King Cole played softly on the radio. "We built this house for the future," he told me that night. At the time, I thought he meant retirement. Children. Grandchildren. I never imagined I'd someday be defending that future from people sitting in my own living room. Travis set the wine bottles onto the dining room table and glanced around thoughtfully. "Structurally, the place has great bones," he said. "A few modern updates could increase the value significantly." Value. There it was again. Not memories. Not family. Value. Vanessa crossed her legs neatly. "And honestly, maintaining a property this size alone isn't realistic long-term." I looked directly at her. "For who?" For a split second, her smile tightened. Then she recovered quickly. "I just mean, eventually everyone needs support." Support. Such gentle words for removal. I noticed Travis studying the built-in bookshelves Richard installed years ago. "How old is the house?" he asked casually. 41 years, I answered quietly. "Richard and I bought the property when Daniel was 3, back when this neighborhood still had dirt roads and open fields, instead of gated entrances, and luxury SUVs in every driveway." I could still picture Richard standing in the empty lot, the day we signed the papers. Wind blowing through his dark hair, while he smiled at me, like we'd just been handed the world. "Someday," he said, "our grandchildren will run through this yard." And they had. Birthday parties, slip and slides, summer barbecues, family photographs on the back porch every 4th of July. An entire lifetime lived between these walls. Vanessa stood suddenly. "Well, Travis and I are heading upstairs to look at the guest bathroom measurements." Guest bathroom measurements. In my grief, she expected me to accept every lie, simply because she delivered it calmly. I nodded once. "Of course!" They disappeared upstairs together moments later. I listened carefully until their voices faded behind the closed guest room door. Then I stood slowly and walked toward the hallway closet near the kitchen. Richard had installed a small security monitor there years ago, after several break-ins happened nearby. Daniel forgot it even existed because Richard rarely used it anymore. But I remembered. I opened the closet door quietly, and for the first time since Richard died, I turned the security system back on. The security monitor flickered softly as the cameras came back online. One by one, grainy images appeared across the small screen inside the hallway closet. Front porch, driveway, kitchen entrance, back patio. Richard installed the system 12 years ago, after several homes in the neighborhood were burglarized during Christmas. At the time, I teased him for being overly cautious. "You watch too many crime shows," I told him while he spent an entire weekend feeding wires through the basement ceiling. He just smiled. A man protects what matters to him. Standing there, now in the dim hallway light, I suddenly understood how serious he had been. The monitors showed Travis's black SUV parked beside Vanessa's silver Lexus in the driveway. Rainwater still clung to the windows while upstairs floorboards creaked softly overhead. They weren't measuring bathrooms. Still, I forced myself to stay calm. At my age, emotions can become dangerous when younger people assume they control the room. Vanessa expected tears, confusion, fragility. Instead, I watched. I spent the afternoon quietly moving through the house like a ghost inside my own life. I folded laundry, watered the plants near the sunroom, Reheated soup I never finished eating. Upstairs, doors opened and closed periodically. Sometimes, laughter drifted down again. Every sound hardened something inside me. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Conference ran late again. Be home tomorrow afternoon. Love you, Mom. I stared at the message for several seconds. Love you. When children are small, you believe love alone will protect families from becoming strangers. But adulthood changes people in quiet ways. Marriage changes them too. I typed back carefully. Drive safe. That was all. The truth was, I no longer knew whether Daniel understood what was happening inside this house or simply chose not to see it. Both possibilities hurt equally. Just before sunset, the upstairs footsteps finally moved toward the staircase. I remained in the living room, knitting aimlessly while Vanessa and Travis came downstairs together. She had changed clothes. Now she wore soft gray leggings and one of Daniel's old college sweatshirts, the oversized sleeves covering part of her hands. To anyone outside this house, she would have looked cozy. Domestic, innocent. Travis carries a folder beneath his arm. Long day,
Vanessa said lightly as they entered the kitchen.
I nodded. Performance between us had become strangely smooth already. Travis opened the refrigerator without hesitation. That bothered me more than it should have. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a stranger behave comfortably in the home your husband built. He grabbed a bottled water before turning toward me. You've got a beautiful property here, Mrs. Carter. Had, not have. The correction echoed silently inside my mind. Thank you, I replied calmly. Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter. Travis works with property development firms across Connecticut, she explained. He's been helping us understand market trends. Market trends. Another soft phrase hiding sharp intentions underneath. I set my knitting aside slowly. What exactly are you planning to do with my house? The room became very quiet. Vanessa recovered first. Nobody's planning anything right now. But you've discussed it. Her expression tightened almost invisibly. We're just being practical, Evelyn. Practical. I was beginning to notice how often selfish people used practical as an excuse for cruelty. Travis shifted awkwardly near the refrigerator.
I should probably get going.
He muttered. Vanessa walked him toward the front door while I remained seated beside the fireplace. But before they stepped outside, I heard something that made my stomach turn cold. Tomorrow night? Travis asked, quietly. Vanessa glanced toward the living room to make sure I couldn't hear. Then she smiled. She usually goes to bed early. The front door closed softly. Behind them. For several seconds, I sat perfectly still, staring at the dark television screen across from me. Then I stood and walked calmly back to the hallway closet. The security monitor automatically stored audio with motion detection. Richard insisted on upgrading that feature after a neighbor's custody dispute years ago. Evidence matters, he always said. I replayed the front door footage carefully. There they were on the screen. Vanessa touching Travis's arm, smiling. Leaning close enough that no reasonable person could misunderstand what they were seeing. Then her voice played clearly through the tiny speaker. She usually goes to bed early. A long silence filled the closet afterward. Not shocked silence. Not broken silence. The kind that comes when puzzle pieces finally lock together. This wasn't reckless behavior. It was routine. Planned. Comfortable. I replayed the clip a second time. Then a third. Finally, I saved the footage onto the backup drive. Richard kept hidden behind the monitor panel. My hands no longer trembled. That frightened me a little. Grief had started changing shape inside me. It was becoming colder now. Sharper. Later that evening, I carried a cup of tea upstairs and paused outside Richard's old study. The door remained half open, amber lamplight, spilling softly across the hallway carpet. Inside, his reading glasses still rested beside the leather chair where he spent every Sunday morning reviewing paperwork. I stepped into the room slowly. The air still carried traces of cedar wood and old books. For the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to cry. Not loudly. Just quiet tears slipping down my face while I sat in Richard's chair, holding the small flash drive in my hand. I didn't see it soon enough, I whispered. The grandfather clock downstairs answered with another hollow chime. Then my eyes drifted toward the framed photograph on Richard's bookshelf. And suddenly, I remembered something he said. 6 months before he died. If anything ever feels wrong, Evie, don't ignore it just to keep the peace. I closed my hand tightly around the flash drive. For 42 years, Richard protected this family. Now it was my turn. Daniel came home Friday afternoon, just before the first snow of the season. I heard his SUV pull into the driveway while I was folding towels in the laundry room. For a brief moment, instinct took over before reason could stop it. Relief. The same relief I used to feel years ago when he came home safely from college breaks or long business trips. But the feeling disappeared almost immediately. Because now I wasn't waiting for my son. I was waiting to see which version of him would walk through the door. The loving boy Richard and I raised, or the man Vanessa had slowly shaped around herself. The front door opened upstairs, followed by Vanessa's bright voice. Daniel's home. I stood still listening carefully. Footsteps crossed the foyer quickly. Then came the soft sound of a kiss. You look exhausted, Vanessa said warmly. Conference was brutal, Daniel muttered. For a second, hearing his voice tightened something painful inside my chest. He sounded tired, older somehow. Richard used to sound like that during difficult years at work. I carried the folded towels upstairs slowly. Daniel stood in the kitchen loosening his tie while Vanessa wrapped her arms around him dramatically. To anyone watching from outside, they looked like a successful suburban couple straight out of a holiday commercial. Perfect lighting. Perfect smiles. Perfect performance. Then Daniel saw me. Mom! His face softened immediately, and for one dangerous second, I almost forgot everything. He crossed the kitchen quickly and hugged me. A real hug. Not rushed, not distracted. You okay? He asked, quietly. I nodded against his shoulder. I'm managing. The truth sat bitterly behind my teeth. Managing betrayal. Managing grief. Managing the slow realization that my family no longer felt safe. Daniel pulled back and studied me carefully. You look tired. So do you. He gave a faint smile. But exhaustion lingered beneath his eyes. Tiny lines had appeared near his forehead recently. Richard had the same lines in his 40s during stressful years building the business. Vanessa touched Daniel's arm gently. I told Evelyn we should all sit down this weekend and discuss some long-term plans. There it was again. Long-term plans. Daniel sighed heavily and rubbed the back of his neck. Vanessa mentioned that. I watched him carefully. No eye contact. No direct explanation. Just vague language floating around the truth. What exactly did she mention? I asked calmly. A strange silence settled across the kitchen. Daniel glanced briefly toward Vanessa before answering. Well, the house is obviously a lot to maintain now. Now, as if Richard's absence automatically erased my place here. Vanessa stepped toward the kitchen island, lowering her voice into that soft, sympathetic tone she used whenever she wanted control to sound compassionate. We're worried about you, Evelyn. Not Mom. Not family. Evelyn, distance hidden inside politeness. Daniel finally looked at me again. Nobody's trying to pressure you, he said quickly. But people only say that when pressure already exists. I folded my hands together calmly. Your father protected this house very carefully. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. What does that mean? Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke too quickly. It means she's emotional right now. Emotional. Another word used to make older women sound unreliable. I noticed Daniel tensed slightly at her interruption. Just a small thing, but important. Tiny fractures were beginning to show. Vanessa moved toward the refrigerator. I'm making salmon tonight, she announced brightly. Travis recommended a new seafood place near Hartford. The room went still. Daniel frowned immediately. Travis? Vanessa barely hesitated. The contractor I mentioned. Too smooth, too prepared. I watched Daniel carefully as confusion flickered across his face. What contractor? And there it was. The first real crack. Vanessa laughed softly. For the renovation ideas, babe. I told you about him. No, she hadn't. I knew that immediately from Daniel's expression. He looked toward me instinctively. When was this? A couple days ago, Vanessa answered before I could speak. You've been busy, remember? Daniel loosened his tie completely now, discomfort settling visibly across his face. What renovations? Vanessa placed wine glasses onto the counter with slightly more force than necessary. The kitchen. The downstairs layout. We talked about this. No, Daniel said slowly. You talked about it. Silence filled the kitchen. A dangerous silence. I remained perfectly still near the dining room doorway, while something shifted quietly between them. For the first time since Richard died, Vanessa noticed it too. Immediately, her tone softened again. I'm just trying to think ahead for everyone. Everyone. Always everyone. Never me. Daniel rubbed his forehead tiredly. Can we not do this tonight? Vanessa's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Fine, but nothing about. Her expression looked fine anymore. Dinner that evening felt painfully artificial. The salmon sat untouched on my plate, while Vanessa filled every silence with forced conversation about holiday decorations and winter travel plans. Daniel barely responded. He kept checking his phone and staring off toward the living room, like his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. At one point, he glanced toward Richard's empty chair beside me, and grief finally crossed his face for the first time all week. Real grief, not managed, not hidden, just pain. It caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw my little boy again. The child who cried days after our family dog died when he was 9 years old. Maybe Vanessa hadn't erased that part of him completely. Then her phone buzzed against the table. A message lit up the screen briefly before she grabbed it too fast. But not before I saw the name. Travis. Daniel saw it too. The entire atmosphere changed instantly. Vanessa stood quickly. I need to take this. She disappeared into the hallway. Daniel was after her silently. Then slowly, he turned toward me. And for the first time since Richard's funeral, I saw uncertainty in my son's eyes. Vanessa stayed in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes. Long enough for dinner to grow cold. Long enough for silence to settle heavily across the table between Daniel and me. I slowly folded my napkin while pretending not to notice the tension tightening around my son's face. He kept staring toward the hallway where Vanessa's voice drifted softly in fragments too low to fully hear. But I caught enough. Not tonight. I said I'll handle it. She's starting to ask questions. Questions. Interesting choice of word. Daniel finally looked at me. Mom, he said quietly, has Vanessa been acting strange lately? The question almost broke my heart. Not because of what it meant, because of how long it took him to ask it. I set my fork down carefully. What do you think? He exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. I don't know anymore. There was exhaustion in his voice now. Real exhaustion. The kind Richard used to carry during difficult years when money was tight and the business nearly collapsed after the recession. For the first time in days, Daniel looked less like Vanessa's husband and more like a man slowly waking from a dream. She's been distracted, he admitted. Secretive, maybe. I remained quiet. Older women learn that silence often invites truth faster than confrontation. Daniel rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. And this contractor thing, he frowned. I never agreed to renovations. I nodded once. She seems very interested in this house. His eyes lifted toward mine immediately. Something passed between us then. A realization neither of us fully wanted to speak aloud yet. Before either of us could continue, Vanessa re-entered the dining room with a bright smile that looked slightly strained around the edges. "Sorry," she said lightly. "Work issue." Daniel stared at her. "At 8:30 on a Friday night?" Vanessa's smile faltered for half a second. "You know how clients are." The lie sat awkwardly in the room. I noticed something then that I should have recognized years earlier. Vanessa became colder whenever she lost control of a conversation. Not louder, not emotional, just colder. She sat down gracefully and reached for her wine glass. "Well," she said carefully, "I was thinking tomorrow we could start looking at some retirement community brochures online." There it was again, direct this time. No soft introduction, no pretending. Daniel looked stunned. "What?" Vanessa blinked at him. "For your mother." The air changed instantly. I watched my son straighten slowly in his chair. "Why would we do that?" Vanessa gave a small laugh like he was being unreasonable. "Daniel, come on. We've talked about this." "No," he said firmly. "You talked about it." The silence that followed felt sharp enough to cut glass. Vanessa set her wine glass down carefully. "I'm trying to think about the future. My father just died 10 days ago." Her jaw tightened. "And your mother can't manage this place forever." Something flickered across Daniel's face then. Anger. Small but real. "You don't get to decide that." For the first time all evening, Vanessa looked genuinely caught off guard. I stayed perfectly still beside Richard's empty chair, while my heart beat harder against my ribs. Tiny fractures. Richard used to say, marriages rarely collapse all at once. They crack quietly first. Hairline fractures beneath pressure. Vanessa recovered quickly, crossing her arms lightly. "I'm not the enemy here," nobody answered. A few moments later, Daniel pushed his chair back from the table. "I need some air." The back door shut behind him, leaving only me and Vanessa in the dining room. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she slowly turned toward me. Her polite mask disappeared completely. "You said something to him." I folded my napkin calmly. "No, I didn't." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "He's been acting different since he got home." I almost smiled at that. Different, meaning less obedient. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "You may think this house belongs to you emotionally, Evelyn, but eventually reality catches up with everyone." Emotionally. Interesting word. She still believed the house legally belonged to Daniel. That assumption was becoming more useful by the hour. I stood slowly from the table, carrying my untouched plate toward the sink. "This house belonged to my husband," I said quietly. And Richard was rarely careless about important things. For the first time, uncertainty flickered behind her eyes. Only briefly, but I saw it. Vanessa studied me carefully now, like she was reassessing something. Perhaps for the first time since Richard died, she realized I felt collapsing as expected. Upstairs, floorboards creaked as the heating system kicked on against the growing winter cold. I rinsed my plate quietly beneath warm water. Then I heard Vanessa ask the question that changed everything. "What exactly did Richard leave you?" I turned off the faucet slowly. And in that moment, I finally understood something clearly. This had never been about grief, or concern, or helping family. It was about ownership. And Vanessa was beginning to realize she might not own as much as she thought. I barely slept Friday night. Not because of Vanessa anymore. Because of Daniel. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I had seen doubt in my son's eyes. Real doubt. The kind that quietly rearranges a person's from the inside. That frightened me almost as much as the betrayal itself. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps downstairs, slow and uneven. Daniel, I slipped on my robe and opened my bedroom door carefully. The upstairs hallway sat dark, except for the faint yellow glow from the kitchen below. I found him standing alone at the sink holding a glass of water. For a moment, he looked exactly like Richard. Same tired posture, same distant stare when something heavy sat on his mind. He noticed me and straightened slightly. "Sorry," he whispered. "Did I wake you?" "No." Neither of us mentioned Vanessa. That silence hung between us immediately. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "I can't sleep lately." Grief sat all over his face now. Not polished grief for funerals and sympathy cards. Real grief. The kind that peers after everyone else goes home. I walked slowly into the kitchen. The clock above the stove read 2:14 a.m. Outside, snow had finally started falling in soft, quiet waves across the backyard. Richard loved so much. Daniel stared out the window. "I still keep expecting Dad to walk through the garage door," he admitted softly. My throat tightened. "So do I." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel sighed heavily. "Mom, did Dad ever say anything to you about Vanessa?" There it was. Not suspicion yet, but instinct. I chose my next words carefully. "Your father noticed things quietly." Daniel looked down at the glass in his hands. "She's been different for a while." A sad smile touched my lips briefly. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "She's probably been the same for a very long time." That landed. I saw it in his face immediately. People suffer most when they realize the warning signs were always there. "Daniel, she keeps talking about the house." I remained calm. "Because the house matters to her." His eyes lifted toward mine. "You really think that's what this is about?"
I thought about the security footage.
The secret phone calls. Travis upstairs. The renovation conversations that somehow never included me. Or Daniel. "I think grief reveals people," I answered quietly. "Sometimes it reveals them faster than we're ready for." Daniel fell silent again. Then his phone buzzed against the counter. "Vanessa." He stared at the screen without answering immediately. Interesting. Eventually he declined the call. A tiny thing, but important. The silence afterward felt different now. Less controlled, more honest. Daniel finally cleared his throat. "I should get some sleep." I nodded, but before he left the kitchen, he stopped beside me. "You know I'd never let anything happen to you, right?" The question almost broke me, because part of him believed it. Even now, even after all this, I touched his hand gently. "I know you want to believe that." Daniel looked confused by the answer, but too exhausted to question it. A moment later, he disappeared upstairs. I remained listening to alone in the kitchen, listening to the old refrigerator hum softly, while snow covered the backyard, in white silence. Richard used to love first snowfalls. Every winter, he made coffee before sunrise and stood on the back porch, just watching the snow settle over the trees. "Everything looks peaceful under snow," he once told me. Even broken things. I closed my eyes briefly. Then I walked quietly toward Richard's study again. The estate folder still rested inside the locked desk drawer, exactly where I left it. This time, I pulled out every document carefully and spread them across the desk beneath the warm reading lamp. Trust, property protections, investment records. And finally, one sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Richard's handwriting. "For Evelyn, if things become difficult." My chest tightened painfully. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a short letter. "Evie, if you're reading this, it means my absence has created problems I hoped would never happen. I need you to remember something important. Kindness and trust are not the same thing. You have spent your whole life protecting this family, but protecting people does not mean surrendering yourself to them. Harold knows everything. Call him if necessary. And one more thing. The cameras record audio." I sat there staring at the letter while tears blurred the ink. Richard knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to prepare for war quietly while pretending life was normal. Suddenly, I heard soft movement outside the study door. I folded the letter instantly. Vanessa stood in the hallway wearing a silk robe, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I didn't realize you were awake," she said softly. Neither of us mentioned the late hour, or the envelope in my hand, or the growing distance spreading through the house like invisible smokes. She glanced briefly toward the paperwork on the desk. "That looks serious." I smiled faintly. "Your father-in-law believed in being prepared." Something cautious flickered across her face. Then she stepped into the room slowly. "You know, Evelyn, all this stress can't be good for you." There it was again. Concern used like a weapon. I carefully placed Richard's letter back inside the envelope. "I've survived harder things than stress." Vanessa studied me quietly, and for the first time since Richard died, I saw uncertainty beginning to replace confidence in her eyes. Saturday morning arrived, gray and bitterly cold. The kind of Connecticut winter morning where the sky looks heavy enough to collapse onto the rooftops. I woke before sunrise to the smell of coffee downstairs. For one disorienting second, warmth rushed through me instinctively. Richard. Every morning for 42 years, he woke before me on weekends and brewed coffee in the old stainless steel percolator because he insisted drip. Coffee tasted like disappointment. But when I stepped into the hallway, I remembered. Richard was gone, and someone else was downstairs in my kitchen. I wrapped my robe tighter and moved quietly toward the staircase. Halfway down, I heard voices drifting from the dining room. Vanessa. And Travis again. "You're pushing too fast," Travis murmured. "We don't have time," Vanessa replied sharply. "He's already starting to question things, Daniel." I stopped moving. Below me, morning light spilled across the dining room table, where Richard used to read the paper every Sunday. Now my daughter-in-law sat there with another man, discussing my family like a business transaction. Travis lowered his voice further. "You said the house was basically guaranteed." "It was supposed to be," Vanessa snapped quietly. "But she knows something." A long silence followed. Then Travis asked the question that made my stomach turn cold. "Does Daniel know about us?" Vanessa laughed softly. "No, and he won't if everyone stays calm." Everyone. Interesting word again. I remained perfectly still on the staircase, while cold realization settled, deeper inside me. This wasn't emotional recklessness anymore. It was strategy. Travis sighed heavily. "You should have handled the paperwork months ago." "I tried," Vanessa hissed. "Richard changed things before he died." Harold Bennett stopped returning my calls after the funeral. Harold. So she already knew something had shifted legally. That explained the growing nervousness behind her composure. I stepped backward carefully, before the staircase creaked beneath me. My heart pounded hard enough I could hear it in my ears. Then I quietly returned upstairs. Not because I was afraid. Because Richard was right. Evidence mattered. 20 minutes later, I sat inside the hallway closet watching security footage replay across the monitor. The dining room camera had captured everything clearly. Vanessa leaning across the table. Travis lowering his voice. Every word. Every expression. I copied the footage onto a second backup drive, while my hands remained strangely steady. Grief had burned through the softer parts of shock already. Now instinct remained. Protect. Observe. Prepare. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel finally came downstairs. I watched through the monitor as he entered the kitchen, still wearing sweatpants and one of Richard's old Yale hoodies. Vanessa immediately shifted into performance mode. Bright smile, warm voice, Coffee's already waiting for him. If I hadn't known the truth myself, I might have believed her too. "Morning, babe," she said sweetly. Daniel looked exhausted. He kissed her cheek automatically before sitting down at the table. Travis appeared, moments later, carrying renovation sketches beneath his arm like yesterday's tension had never happened. The entire scene looked wrong. Too rehearsed. Too smooth. Daniel frowned immediately when he saw him. "You're here early." Travis gave an easy smile. "Wanted to go over a few structural ideas before heading out." Structural ideas. Another lie wrapped in business language. Daniel rubbed his eyes tiredly. "I don't remember asking for renovations," Vanessa answered quickly. "It's just exploratory." Daniel looked unconvinced. From upstairs, I could see it now more clearly. The distance growing. Tiny fractures widening. I walked downstairs deliberately loud enough for them to hear me coming this time. The room changed instantly when I entered. Vanessa straightened. Travis stepped back slightly. Daniel looked relieved. "Morning, Mom." "Good morning." I poured myself coffee quietly, while snow drifted steadily outside the kitchen windows. Then Travis unrolled renovation sketches across the table. "I was thinking the downstairs wall here could come out completely," he explained. "Open concept layouts increase resale value significantly." Resale value again. I looked directly at Daniel. "Are you planning to sell your father's house?" Daniel blinked hard. "What?" "No." Vanessa jumped in immediately. "Nobody said that." Travis rolled the papers closed awkwardly. The tension in the room had become impossible to ignore now. I stirred cream slowly into my coffee. "Interesting," I said softly, "because everyone seems very interested in what this property is worth." Silence. Daniel stared at Vanessa. And for the first time, she looked genuinely cornered. Not angry. Afraid, only for a second. But enough. Then her phone buzzed loudly against the counter. The screen lit up. A message preview appeared before she grabbed it. "Miss you already." Travis, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Daniel looked from the phone to Travis. Then back to Vanessa. The room seemed to collapse inward around us. Vanessa snatched the phone so quickly, she nearly knocked over her coffee. "It's not what it looks like," she said immediately. The oldest sentence in human history. Daniel stood slowly from the table. His face had gone completely pale. "What the hell is going on?" Travis grabbed his coat instantly. "I should leave." "Yes," Daniel said coldly. "You should." Vanessa stepped toward her husband. "Daniel, listen to me." "No," he snapped. The sharpness in his voice shocked all of us, including Vanessa, including me. For one brief second, I saw Richard in my son completely. Not weak, not manipulated, furious. And suddenly, for the first time since Richard died, Vanessa looked like someone realizing the ground beneath her feet might finally be collapsing. Travis left without another word. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the dining room windows, leaving behind a silence so heavy it almost felt physical. Snow continued, falling outside in slow white waves, while the three of us remained frozen, inside the kitchen. Daniel stood beside the table, staring at Vanessa like he no longer recognized her. Vanessa clutched her phone tightly in one hand, and I sat quietly beside the coffee maker, listening to the old refrigerator hum softly in the background. It amazed me how ordinary sounds continue even while families fall apart. Finally, Daniel spoke. "How long?" His voice sounded flat now. Hollow. Vanessa swallowed hard. "It's complicated." Wrong answer. I saw it immediately in Daniel's face. "When did it start?" he asked again. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "It wasn't serious." Another wrong answer. Daniel let out a short laugh that carried no humor at all. "You brought him into my parents' house." Parents, not ours. Not home. Something subtle had shifted. Vanessa stepped toward him carefully. "You've been gone constantly, Daniel. Your father died. Everything became overwhelming. So you started sleeping with another guy?" Her eyes flickered toward me briefly. And for the first time since this began, I saw genuine panic behind her composure. Because now the performance was collapsing too fast to control. "I didn't mean." For this to happen, she whispered. Daniel looked exhausted suddenly. Not angry anymore, just tired in a deep, painful way. When? Silence. Then Vanessa answered quietly. A few months ago. A few months. That meant Richard was still alive when it started. My chest tightened sharply, but I kept my expression calm. Daniel looked like someone had struck him across the face. You were doing this while my father was dying? Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. That silence answered everything. Daniel turned away from her completely then, bracing both hands against the kitchen counter, while snowlight reflected pale across the windows. I watched my son carefully. People imagine betrayal looks dramatic when it finally arrives. Usually it looks quiet, like a person suddenly struggling to breathe inside their own life. Vanessa moved toward him again. Daniel, please. Don't. His voice cracked this time. Not loud, just broken. The room fell silent again. I stood slowly from my chair and carried my coffee cup to the sink. Neither of them looked at me. Their marriage had become the center of the room now, collapsing inward under its own weight. But as I rinsed the cup beneath warm water, I realized something important. This wasn't over. Not even close, because affairs heal or explode eventually. But greed lingers, and Vanessa still believed she could salvage something from this house. That afternoon, Daniel locked himself inside Richard's old workshop in the garage for nearly 3 hours. The same workshop where Richard taught him how to sand wood, repair cabinets, and change brake pads during high school summers. I watched from the kitchen window as snow gathered across the roof, while dim light glowed beneath the garage door. Vanessa spent most of that time upstairs, making phone calls in hushed, angry whispers. Twice, I heard Travis's name. Once, I heard mine. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang unexpectedly. Harold Bennett. I stepped quietly into Richard's study before answering. Evelyn, Harold said gently. I was meaning to call earlier this week. His calm voice immediately reminded me of funeral paperwork, legal offices, and the terrible numbness of burial arrangements. I reviewed Richard's estate documents again this morning. He continued carefully. There are several things we should discuss privately. My eyes drifted toward the closed study door. How privately? A pause. Richard had concerns before he passed. There it was again. Concerns. Not suspicions, not paranoia. Concerns. I sat slowly in Richard's leather chair. What kind of concerns? Harold lowered his voice slightly. Your husband requested additional legal protections around the property approximately 6 months ago. Exactly when Vanessa's affair began. Sungzins spread through me quietly. He believed someone might eventually pressure you into transferring ownership. I closed my eyes briefly. Richard knew. Not every detail, perhaps, but enough to prepare carefully while pretending life remained normal. There's more, Harold added. My grip tightened around the phone. What? Richard updated his power of attorney documentation. Under no circumstances can Daniel or his spouse access trust assets without your direct written authorization. Outside the study window, snow continued, falling steadily across the backyard. The world looked peaceful, clean. Meanwhile, inside this house, secrets were finally surfacing one by one, like cracks beneath ice. After I hung up, I remained seated in silence for a long time, staring at Richard's bookshelf. Then I noticed something unusual. One book near the center shelf sat slightly crooked. Richard hated crooked books. I stood slowly and pulled it free. Behind it rested a small sealed envelope. In Richard's handwriting were 4 simple words. If Vanessa pushes hard. My heart began pounding immediately. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a second flash drive and a handwritten note. Evie, if you found this, then I was right to worry. Watch the videos before trusting anyone, especially if Daniel refuses to see the truth. I stared at the flash drive in my trembling hand while footsteps moved somewhere upstairs. Then, for the first time since Richard died, fear settled quietly into my chest, because suddenly I understood something terrifying. My husband hadn't just suspected Vanessa. He had been gathering evidence. I didn't open Richard's flash drive immediately. For nearly an hour, I simply sat in his study holding it while snow pressed softly against the windows and the house creaked around me with familiar winter sounds. Upstairs, I could hear drawers opening and closing sharply. Vanessa packing, or pretending to. Down in the garage, Daniel still hadn't come inside. The entire house felt suspended between truth and collapse. Finally, just after sunset, I inserted the flash drive into Richard's old laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dark study. 3 video files appeared, each labeled with dates. The earliest was from almost 5 months ago. My chest tightened as I clicked play. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Security footage from the driveway camera. Vanessa stepping outside while Daniel was away on business. Then Travis's SUV appeared. He walked to the front door carrying wine and takeout bags like someone arriving for dinner. Not a contractor, not a friend. Comfortable, expected. The timestamp showed 8:14 p.m. 2 hours later, another clip showed the upstairs bedroom lights turning off. Together, I closed my eyes briefly, not because I was shocked anymore. Because Richard had known while he was still alive. The second video hurt worse. Richard himself appeared briefly in the frame, returning home early one afternoon. He paused inside the driveway after seeing Travis' vehicle parked beside Vanessa's car. Even through grainy footage, I recognized the exact moment realization hit him. The stillness, the disappointment, the exhaustion. My husband stood there for nearly 30 seconds before walking inside the house, carrying a pharmacy bag in one hand. Cancer medication. My throat tightened painfully. While he was fighting for his life, Vanessa was already betraying this family under our roof. I pressed a trembling hand against my mouth. The third file contained audio only. Richard's voice. Weak, tired, but steady. If you're hearing this, Evie, then things unfolded the way I feared they might. Tears blurred my vision instantly. I wanted to believe I was wrong about her, he continued quietly. And maybe I should told you sooner. But you loved Daniel too much to hear it while I was still alive. I lowered my head slowly. Even now, Richard was protecting me. I hired Travis's company briefly last spring, he explained. That's how Vanessa met him. After I became sick, I noticed changes. Secret calls. Missing paperwork. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The study felt impossibly quiet, except for Richard's recorded breathing between sentences. I started documenting everything after I discovered Vanessa trying to access trust documents without permission. I froze. Trust documents. This had been about money long before the affair. If Daniel stands by her after learning the truth, Richard said softly, you must protect yourself anyway. My chest ached so sharply I could barely breathe. Then his voice gentled slightly. You spent 42 years building a family beside me, Evie. Don't let guilt convince you to surrender what we built to people who confuse kindness with weakness. The recording ended. Silence filled the study again. I sat motionless, staring at the dark laptop screen while grief and clarity settled together inside me in a strange, painful calm. A soft knock suddenly startled me. Daniel stood in the doorway. His eyes looked red, tired, broken. How long have you been in here? He asked quietly. I looked at the laptop, then back at my son. A while. His gaze drifted toward the screen. What is all this? For a moment, I almost protected him again. Mothers spend their lives trying to soften pain for their children. But Richard was right. Protection and surrender were not the same thing. I turned the laptop slowly toward him. Daniel watched the videos in complete silence. No interruptions, no denial. Just silence, growing heavier with every minute. When Richard's audio recording ended, Daniel leaned back in the chair like all the strength had drained from his body. "She was doing this while Dad was dying," he whispered. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Daniel covered his face with both hands. I defended her. Pain cracked through his voice now. I defended her to everyone. I looked toward Richard's empty reading chair beside the bookshelf. "You loved your wife." "No," Daniel said bitterly. "I loved who I thought she was." Downstairs, we heard the front door open suddenly. Then Vanessa's voice. "Daniel?" Neither of us moved. Her footsteps crossed the foyer quickly before stopping outside the study. When she entered the room and saw the laptop screen, all color drained from her face instantly. For the first time since Richard's funeral, Vanessa looked truly afraid. "Daniel," she started carefully. "I can explain." "How long?" he asked quietly. She looked at me first. Not him. Me. Like she still believed this was somehow negotiable. "That footage doesn't show everything," she whispered. Daniel stood slowly. "You brought him into this house while my father was dying." Tears finally filled Vanessa's eyes. Whether from guilt or panic, I honestly couldn't tell. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Daniel laughed softly. A broken sound. "Nothing about this was supposed to happen." Vanessa stepped toward him desperately. "We can fix this." "No," he said quietly. "You can't." The room fell silent. Then Daniel looked toward me, and in his face, I finally saw the full weight of realization settle over him. Not just betrayal, not just infidelity, but the understanding that his father had died, trying to protect us from someone already living inside our family. Vanessa moved out 3 days later. Not dramatically. No screaming. No shattered dishes or slammed doors like the scenes people expect in movies. Real endings are usually quieter than that. She packed expensive handbags into neat white boxes while movers carried furniture through the front. Hallway Richard once decorated every Christmas with cedar garlands and warm lights. The entire time, snow continued falling softly outside.
Don't.
Daniel barely spoke to her. That seemed to hurt her more than anger would have. Silence has a way of making consequences feel permanent. I stayed upstairs, most of moving day inside the sunroom. Richard built 15 years ago, after I mentioned wanting a place to read during winter mornings. The room overlooked the backyard where cardinals hopped across snow-covered bushes while movers crossed the driveway below, carrying pieces of a life that no longer belonged here. Around noon, Vanessa appeared quietly in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Without perfect makeup and carefully arranged smiles, she suddenly looked much younger to me. Not innocent, just smaller. "I never wanted things to end this way," she said softly. I closed the book resting in my lap. "Then you should have made different choices." Her eyes filled slightly. I did love Daniel. I believe that, strangely enough. People can love someone and still destroy them. Those truths live side by side more often than we admit. Vanessa glanced around the sunroom slowly. "This house changed everything," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "Choice did." The words settled heavily between us. For the first time since I met her 13 years ago, Vanessa had nothing prepared to say. No polished response. No manipulation. Just silence. Eventually, she looked toward me again. "Do you hate me?"
I thought about Richard, about the hospital room.
About security footage. About grief sitting beside betrayal beneath the same roof. Then I answered honestly. "No." She looked surprised. "I pity you." That seemed to wound her more deeply than anger ever could. A few minutes later, she picked up her coat and left the room quietly. I never saw her again after that day. The divorce took nearly 8 months. Daniel moved into a small townhouse 30 minutes away while everything was finalized. For a while, our conversations remained awkward and painfully careful. Like both of us were learning how to speak again after surviving a storm. Grief had changed him. Not all at once, but steadily, like winter, slowly softening into spring. One Sunday afternoon in March, he came over carrying groceries and replaced the broken porch light without me asking. Richard used to do little things like that constantly. I watched from the kitchen window while cold wind moved through the trees. And suddenly I realized something important. My son was still there, buried beneath years of compromise and quiet manipulation, but still there. Later that evening, Daniel stood awkwardly near the sink while I washed dishes. "I should have listened sooner," he said quietly. I kept rinsing plates beneath warm water. "You trusted your wife. I ignored things." The honesty in his voice softened something inside me. He looked older now, not physically, spiritually, like someone who finally understood how easily comfort can blind people to truth. "I thought keeping peace meant being a good husband," he admitted. "Richard once said nearly the same thing during a difficult year in our marriage decades ago. Peace, such a beautiful word, and such a dangerous one when it costs your dignity." I dried my hands slowly and looked at my son. "Peace without honesty isn't peace, Daniel." He lowered his eyes. "I know that now." Outside, late afternoon, sunlight stretched across the backyard snow in long golden lines. Winter was finally beginning to loosen its grip. Over the following months, the house slowly started feeling like mine again. Not ours, not haunted, mine. I donated old furniture Vanessa planned to modernize. I put family photographs back where they originally belonged. Richard's workshop stayed untouched except for fresh flowers. I placed there every Sunday morning beside his favorite radio. And eventually, I stopped checking the security cameras. Not because I forgot. Because I no longer needed to survive in defense mode. One evening in early April, Margaret came over for dinner, carrying peach cobbler and terrible gossip about 3 different neighbors. We sat in the kitchen laughing harder than I had laughed in months, while jazz music played softly through the old speakers. Richard installed years ago. At one point, Margaret looked around the room quietly. "You're different," she said. I smiled faintly. "So is the house." And it was true. The heaviness was gone now. Not the grief. I would carry Richard's absence for the rest of my life. But grief and fear are not the same thing. That took me nearly 70 years to understand. The following Saturday, Daniel brought my granddaughter Sophie by for lunch. She ran through the front door, wearing mittens, and immediately wrapped her arms around my waist. "Dad says you're making grilled cheese," she announced seriously. I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "Your father talks too much," Daniel smiled quietly from the doorway. And for one brief moment, standing there inside the warm kitchen, while snow melted slowly outside the windows, life felt ordinary again, not perfect, but real. That evening, after they left, I carried a cup of tea onto the back porch just as sunset painted the sky pale gold above the trees. Richard loved sunsets in winter. He used to say, cold air made colors look sharper. I sat wrapped in his old navy sweater, listening to wind move softly through the yard we built, together over 4 decades. The same yard where Daniel learned baseball, where Sophie built snowmen, where Richard kissed me one 4th of July while fireworks echoed across the neighborhood. A lifetime lived in ordinary moments. I finally understood then what my husband had tried to protect all along. Not just the house, not the money, me, my dignity, my peace, my right to remain standing, even after betrayal tried to make me small. The grandfather clock chimed softly inside the house behind me. Steady, still moving forward. I looked out across the snow-covered yard and whispered the words. Richard used to tell me whenever life became difficult. "We'll be all right, Evie." This time, for the first time in many months, I believed it. Losing Richard taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. Kindness without boundaries invites people to mistake love for weakness. For years, I believed keeping the peace was the same as protecting a family. But real family is built on honesty, loyalty, and respect, not silence and manipulation. In the end, Richard didn't just leave me a house. He left me the strength to stand up for myself when everyone expected me to quietly disappear. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all was learning that grief can break your heart, but it can also open your eyes.